3 squares and an Ed? More like 666 fucks and a shit. Oh my god, this episode from Ed and Eddy sucks. Here are the reasons why this episode sucks in my opinion. The episode starts while Eddy is upstairs in Ed's house, where Ed is acting quite hyper and Eddy is bored. Fed up with Ed's excitement, Eddy demands to know what the big deal is, and learns that Ed has applied lubricant to his laundry chute so that they can have a fun time riding down it. For safety reasons, he tries to offer Eddy a pillow to slide on, but an impatient Eddy instead just dives right in sans protection. Ed quickly follows him down his father's hole, and they end up in the basement, where Ed checks on his pet spider, Mildred. While Ed does this, a bored Eddy decides to check out what else is downstairs, and stumbles upon Ed's cabinet of failed inventions and turns on the operatic. Ed quickly rushes over and turns it off, but Eddy then finds another one of Ed's inventions and lugs it out. Ed tries to dissuade his friend from messing around with it, but Eddy ignores him and accidentally turns on the volcano vacuum, which sucks Eddy's head inside. Ed chuckles, but an angry Eddy gets offended and proceeds to chase Ed all the way to Ed's house. When they get to the backyard, however, Ed pulls up short, as a tripwire with several items is strung up. Eddy isn't as observant, and he runs into Ed, who falls, tripping the wire. Sarah and Jimmy instantly arrive on the scene dressed as prison guards and demand to know what they're doing. Ed and Eddy reveal they're there to see Ed, of course, and learn that he's been grounded for some unknown reason and that there are to be no visitors. Hearing this and seeing the tight security, Eddy seemingly gives up and both he and Ed leave. Of course, Eddy won't give up on a friend if it involves an adventure and perhaps some mischief, and soon enough Jimmy is distracted by a leprechaun and leaves his post to chase it, with Sarah in hot pursuit with the intent to bring her friend and guard back. Eddy and Ed then peek around the corner of the house and look towards Ed's window. Ed expresses some doubts as to the viability of this venture, as there is something called the parental ring wherein all the parents contact each other if they find the other's spawns committing some wrongdoing, but Eddy makes him feel guilty about wanting to abandon Ed, and so Ed goes along with the plan despite his misgivings. Ed is stuck in his room with no TV or other form of entertainment save for a cardboard box. He is taking his punishment poorly, as the box is soaked through with tears and there is a puddle of the briny liquid all around him, and he is upset about being in solitary confinement. Suddenly, a drain in his floor rattles, and then expands with a miraculous device that allows Ed and Eddy to climb out. Ed has a joyful reunion with them, but when Eddy reveals his intent to get Ed out, Ed quickly wails and dives back into his box in order to sadly live out his punishment because he will be in even more trouble if Sarah finds out that Ed snuck out during his punishment. Eddy watches this display without a trace of mirth until he gets the idea to break Ed out so that even he won't know he's missing, and a short while later, Ed is seen standing in different clothes while a dummy composed of a vacuum cleaner, a pineapple, a book, and his clothes sits in his box. Eddy then stuffs Ed back down the drain and they head outside through the house's plumbing. When they get out of the house, Eddy congratulates Ed on his escape, only for Ed to get scared and run back in through the window to avoid getting in more trouble, which has apparently been unlocked this whole time. Ed and Eddy stare after him in disbelief until they hear Sarah coming, and leap in through the window after him. While the Eds were distracted, Sarah and Jimmy finished the leprechaun ruse, and have come back in order to resume guarding Ed. The Eds cower on a pipe on the ceiling of the basement as Sarah and Jimmy look and, fooled by the dummy, yell at Ed to keep it down, not knowing that Ed tried to sneak out. Eddy's next idea is that if they can't go out through the backyard, they'll just have to walk out the front door. To this end, he drags his friends out of Ed's room into the general basement area, keeping his hands over their mouths so they won't say something to blow their cover. He tells them that they'll only have to go up the stairs in order to get their freedom, only to turn around and find that Ed's parents have somehow gotten rid of the stairs because Ed is grounded. Eddy then comes up with another idea as to how to get up the stairs, and to this end pulls out a giant safety pin, which he plunges into the basement concrete. He then proceeds to lay each of his friends back on it and use the pin to catapult them into the living room. Once they land, Eddy dances over to the front door and is about to throw it open when it gets thrown open right into their faces. While the Eds pull backwards into the living room, Sarah and Jimmy come in, Jimmy being towed in a wagon after suffering a job-related injury, a splinter from his wooden rifle, and having to receive medical care. Thinking quickly, Eddy hauls his friends up the stairs just before Sarah can come in and see them. As the Eds hide behind the banister and sneak down the hall to shelter, Sarah tows Jimmy through the room below. The Eds finally reach a shelter of sorts, which is actually Sarah's room. Eddy tries to leap out the window, but finds it closed. Seeing this, Ed comes up with a small plan, which Eddy agrees to help with. While the Eds work on this new escape plan, Sarah and Jimmy go downstairs with Ed's dinner, buttered toast and gravy, Ed's favorite. When Sarah knocks on the door, Ed doesn't answer, so she looks inside and sees Ed reading a book. At first, she is irritated that Ed would ignore her, but soon another problem strikes her: Ed should not have a book with him. She quickly goes in and marches up to him, asking how he procured the book. When she touches him, the pineapple falls off of the vacuum cleaner, and Sarah realizes she's been tricked and Ed has snuck out. She lets out an angry yell that echoes throughout the house, scaring Ed and alerting Ed and Eddy to the fact that they've been found out. While Jimmy runs outside to make sure they haven't yet escaped, Sarah runs upstairs, blasting her whistle all the way. Ed tries to remind his friends that he is grounded, but Eddy cuts him off, saying he's free as a bird. Sarah bursts through the barricaded door just in time to see the Eds leap from a window and take flight on the coattails of a kite. While she yells at them, Eddy taunts her, and they nearly get away up until the kite handle runs out of string and the Eds fall to earth, landing on Jimmy. Ed pulls himself out of the hole and pukes out Eddy, who barfs out Ed, who throws up Jimmy. Sarah approaches the four and angrily tells Ed that she will be telling Mom. This reminds Ed of the so-called parental ring, and he reminds Eddy of it as well, much to their combined dismay. A while later, Ed is shown reading a book in his room, having apparently been grounded for 3 days. A makeshift phone rings, and he answers to hear Eddy on the other end, who has also been grounded, apparently forever. A short time later, Ed comes on, and Eddy starts to outline his plan for yet another great escape. Before Eddy can get very far, though, all 3 lines go taut and yank the Eds against their respective walls. This wall banging goes on repeatedly, because in the center of the cul-de-sac are Sarah and Jimmy, who have hooked an umbrella to the lines and are pulling down on it repeatedly in order to cause the Eds pain as the episode ends. Wow. Just fucking wow. That was one of the worst episodes from Ed, Edd n Eddy. If you haven't seen it, don't watch it. It's a waste of time. I don't know who likes this episode, but do you know who hates this episode? Yami Pokemon Us Netherlands WordGirl is Iran. He was the one who requested me this rant. So screw 3 squares and an Ed. And screw amigos bad. An episode from Hi Puffy Yumi, friend or foe, is 789,000 times better than 3 squares and an Ed. End of rant.